Okay, today we're talking about risk. Big thing with risk is that it's all about perception. What I consider risky is not necessarily what you consider risky. So, talking about risk is somewhat subjective. Now, again, risk doesn't always match statistics. Right now, I want you to pause the video and think which one you think is riskier: driving a car, flying in a plane, swimming with a shark, hanging out with a cow, riding a bicycle, or living near a nuclear reactor. So pause, take a second, get it in your mind. Okay, now your actual answer. There is more risk associated with driving a car, hanging out near cows, or riding a bicycle. Now, when you say there's more risk, there's a formula for risk. It's the number of people harmed divided by the number of people perceived to be at risk, which means, let's use the shark example, the number of people that are harmed by cows versus the number of people that hang out near cows, the perceived risk of cows, is higher than the number of people who are harmed by sharks compared to the perceived risk of hanging out near a shark. So actual risk has a math, but risk as a concept is almost all subjective. Now, there's a higher perception of risk when you aren't in control. Homegirl is an absolute terrible driver. When I'm in the passenger seat, I'm constantly, instinctively trying to press on brakes that aren't there because she's just not good. It feels like I'm out of control. I don't like that feeling. So, when driving with her, it feels riskier, even though, according to our risk formula, it's not. Okay. Now, this system, is it perfect? No. Why? There's bias, and then like we talked about in a previous video, there are mutations or tolerances. People like Ozzy Osbourne who tolerate chemicals stronger, more effectively than other people. So if we used him as part of our study, the risk would appear to be lower than it actually is. Also, a lot of these studies doing this math, like gathering data, are done by individuals or companies who may have a bias. For example, in all the way up through the 70s, 80s, and even the early 90s, it was pretty common for doctors to say that smoking wasn't only not dangerous, it was good for you, because tobacco companies were paying a lot of money to get these studies, in sarcastic quotations, done supporting their claim. And we get a nice picture of a shark. That's Bruce. And then this is you guys, for the most part. Your perceived risk versus your actual risk. Oh no. Okay. Now, when talking about risk, prevention is better than mitigation. Prevention, again, is stopping it before it happens. Mitigation is fixing the problem after it happens. Now, when companies are assessing whether or not to do prevention versus mitigation, they'll do a cost-benefit analysis. And it's sad, but money usually comes out ahead of wealth. If it will cost the company less money to pay out lawsuits or fines from the EPA or whatever, versus the money they'll make from using, let's say, a specific pesticide, generally they'll make the choice to use the pesticide because it gets more money. So in that case, dollars are considered more important than human health. It's also a little difficult to assess because dollars are a fixed quantifiable thing. You can count how many dollars or pennies it's going to cost you. But when assessing environmental health or human health, you can't put a dollar on that. You can't say this baby being born with no arms and legs is worth $4 million. You just can't. So quantity versus quality also becomes an issue. Now, philosophies of risk. There are two. The first is innocent until proven guilty. The second is called the precautionary principle. Now, I'm sure from context you can figure it out, but let's talk about that. In the innocent until proven guilty approach, the burden of proof is on either a government agency or a scientist or someone else to prove that something is harmful after it's already been being used. For instance, thalidomide. The burden of proof on thalidomide was, okay, you say it's causing these birth defects, prove it. So after it had already been used and caused all those babies to be born with stunted arms and other sorts of birth defects, teratogens, then it was proven to be harmful, then it was pulled. Companies at the time probably had an idea that it was being harmed, but under this innocent until proven guilty approach, they could do basically whatever they wanted. This innocent until proven guilty approach is used in the United States, and there are a couple of different agencies that regulate that. Now, going forward, we have some color coordination. So, the FDA regulates what goes into or onto your body. Now, that's obviously not the fully technical scientific definition of it, but for this class, that's what you need to understand. And the FDA gets that regulatory authority through the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act, which was signed in 1938. So, some things that go into or onto your body: food, drugs, like prescriptions, cosmetics. Ladies, when you put lipsticks on your face, or some fellows, I guess, it is 2020, that's all regulated by the FDA. Now, that also falls under the innocent until proven guilty approach, so let's say Jeffree Star could be putting out something that isn't necessarily the most healthy, but then the burden of proof is on the FDA to prove that it's a problem. Now, this is in no way saying Jeffree Star puts out low-quality product. Jeffree Star looks like an alien, but he's a pretty okay dude. Now, the EPA regulates what goes into or onto the environment, and it uses FIFRA for that, which is the Federal Insecticide, Fungicide, and Rodenticide Act. I don't feel like writing it all out. That was signed in 1947. Now here we have a nice little asterisk next to EPA. So we're going to scroll down to that and come back to it. The EPA is also responsible for anything that's not explicitly covered by anyone else. So if there's anything that doesn't fall under one of these above categories, the EPA is responsible for it. And its regulatory authority comes from the Toxic Substances Control Act, which was signed in 1976. It's kind of the, okay, no one else has claimed it, you're responsible for it. And then there's the Cpsc, the Consumer Protection Safety Commission. It requires labeling for products that are considered hazardous, and that authority comes from the Federal Hazardous Substances Act, signed in 1960. Now, there's a bunch of stuff here that I didn't feel like writing down. First off, we have this little asterisk. So, the asterisk goes back to one of our previous lessons, where anything that's considered hazardous is supposed to have a label. But we talked about how, in the correct amount, anything could be considered hazardous. So, there's kind of a subjective understanding about what counts as hazardous and what doesn't. For instance, bananas. Too many bananas can harm you, but the amount is so high that bananas don't require labeling by the Cpsc. Now, that doesn't apply to all food. Hopping over to here with the FDA is supposed to be responsible for what goes into your body, but there's that example of the Kinder Surprise eggs that a lot of you guys have heard about. Because it contained little toys, and it was in the implicit idea was that because it was a little candy, it was supposed to be for children of all ages. There's a ban on putting small parts on toys for small children. So the Cpsc banned Kinder Surprise. That's also why there's those little labels that say, warning, small parts, choking hazard on many, many things. Or if you've ever looked inside a pair of shoes when you buy it, it has that little silica gel packet and it says, do not eat it. It seems like a common sense thing, don't eat it, but the Cpsc requires labeling on things like that. And then, talking about risk, there we go.